Hi, everybody, and welcome back to my Real Estate Change. This is the second season and episode 6, I think, and probably quite bizarre because Helen, who I have the great pleasure of interviewing today, I've known for some time, and I always sort of have seen Helen Lam and Jordan Kostelek as sort of going hand in hand with my relationship with Asia, and by some fluke, even though Helen was planned to be in season 1, Jordan and Helen are within 24 hours of each other in terms of the recordings of this series again. So
my nemesis.
I don't know how it happens, but it always does. But there we go. There we go. Anyway, for those of you who understand the format, this is the Real Estate Change series. It is a live format. So if any of you have any questions for me or Helen, please pop them into that Twitter stream, the LinkedIn stream, or YouTube. Very, very happy to answer them. But really, this is all about innovation, leadership, culture, digital transformation within the built environment. And I try and bring in some really interesting leaders that I've seen and met from all around the world to interview and just find out a little bit more about sort of them and the companies that they work for and the sort of the attitudes to change. So Helen, without further ado, could you just give a little bit of an introduction to yourself, Lendlease, and sort of the size of the company, size of your team, just as a sort of succinct, tiny introduction to what that is before we explore some other areas.
Sure. So it's always a pleasure for, talking to James. And I really appreciate all the things you're doing for the industry in terms of trying to have those real conversations and obviously drive change and really authentic conversations in this space. So I'm Helen Lam. I am the global lead for our practices team, which we operate in 4 regions in Europe, America, Australia, and Asia. I'm currently sitting in Singapore in our headquarters in Singapore at Pay Labour Quarter. So Lendlease is an Australian multinational global development, construction, and property investment company. We're headquartered in Sydney in Australia, and we've been founded about 64 years ago now, and we've got over 11,000 employees. So being probably the only truly global developer, we have a great purpose, and it's to really create places where communities thrive. And everyone that I've worked with in Lendlease really is really strongly attached to that purpose, because we get to make decisions every day that actually influence great outcomes for our community, whether it's in digital transformation in our built environment, or just by having these conversations like we are now, James, to push our industry to do better and respond to our customers and the world issues right now.
Yeah, and do you know what? It's such a really simple purpose and a vision, and we'll come back to that a little bit more broadly later on. But to create places people thrive is so simple, and yet the nuance and the complexity around that, I think, is a fascinating challenge for everybody.
Yeah.
But just to come back to something that you said there, ultimately someone has to have this conversation about the change and transformation within our environment. So I kind of have taken it on as my mission to try and help the industry transform. And in reality, that really wouldn't happen without some partners that I have to mention, because they make it possible for me to do this sort of stuff. So to Equiem, my industry partner, who, when we talk about transformation, I mean, they're the actual classic, because they're transforming commercial spaces to what they class as world-class destinations. And ultimately, and I know, Helen, you're a big one into education and learning as well. I've had the great pleasure of working with Oxford University and Sage Business School in my own journey. I'm now taking some of their courses to improve my leadership styles and everything that I'm doing. And I actually quite like their tagline as well, which is the same Oxford education virtually. And it's a really nice way of doing it. And obviously, I cannot forget Unissu, the company that I founded quite a few years ago now, which is the PropTech Procurement platform, Unissu. Even though I'm not necessarily there on the operational leadership anymore, as a non-exec chairman, I'm still flying the flag for something which I feel is really important in the industry, which is how do we support that transformational change and find the right solution for the companies which are changing. So without further ado, Helen, I'd really like to start this sort of discussion point in getting a bit of a holistic and a broad perspective about that sort of the term innovation within Lendlease. You know, what does it look like? What does it mean to you as a company?
So I guess we've been on a journey when it comes to innovation. We used to have roles, dedicated roles, head of innovations, innovation portfolio managers, innovation managers. And we felt that it was not really achieving what we were trying to solve as a company, as an organization, um, because really when it comes to true innovation, it should be how do we as a company holistically work towards the same purpose of really recently we've been disrupting ourselves, rather expect the industry to start disrupting. How do we disrupt ourselves and question how do we actually approach how we, as a development in the development space, how we build, how we, deal with our customers, understand our customers, how do we deliver better products, better services, better spaces, and that is expecting everyone in the company to innovate and innovate towards the common purpose. So you don't have roles in innovation anymore. I think it's been a great, I think, discovery to say that you can't have people dedicated to have the job of innovating on the side. Um, because it just doesn't work. It's not effective change transformation. It's not effective business integration. And it's really not effective innovation because you're kind of pushing innovation on the side. So it's really how do we set the foundation of really those critical purpose and objectives in what you're trying to solve and what are you trying to change and what are you trying to innovate as a company, as a culture, as a step change in what you're trying to achieve. Yeah. So
I find that fascinating because when you and I were first acquainted, I mean, years and years ago now, I remember so distinctly what I was so impressed about by Lendlease was, I mean, you had an innovation department. Until recently, you held that role of sort of head of innovation Asia, which we'll come on to in a minute. So that has, I mean, what I really like about what you've just said is it shows a mentality shift change within Lendlease that you are not an innovation manager who's effectively, I think personally, and I think you've alluded to it, that if you have that tag of being the innovation manager, the innovation director, you're where the buck stops. That's where everyone comes and knocks on your door rather than looking at it, to use your term, more holistically. So has it been a challenge to review the mentality of innovation, or has that been relatively sort of an easy transition?
I think there's a couple of things. So we have really tried to disrupt ourselves as culturally. So we ask ourselves, what are the problems we're trying to solve? How can we understand our customer and be really more customer focused as an organization? How do we deliver better, quicker, cheaper, faster without compromising quality? How do we get more efficient in our processes, how we work, the way we work? And then a lot of the innovation principles is how do we drive consistency and drive that 80-20 rule? Because if you're a company as ours, globally and locally, you don't want to rework. You don't want to start from scratch. So how do we actually create the 80-20 rule where you're driving consistency? And it's actually interesting that you're saying, typically you don't talk about consistency when it comes to innovation, but actually to be consistent as a large organization delivering a large pipeline, it does change how we work, and it really drives a culture of like a strong purpose to do, to innovate if you get the 80% right. And what we've done as an organization is also focus on really big targets like our mission zero sustainability targets, right? So when you're pushing really, really, really strong targets in the market and you're to your customers, to our stakeholders, and what that means is you have no, and everyone is on that purpose. As an organization, we're all part of, responsible and accountable to deliver those roadmaps, to deliver the mission zero targets. So as we align the culture of that, and we know the purpose of why we're doing it, such around our sustainability targets, all the way to how we operate as a, like almost as a digitally aligned real estate developer company. We we then all everything we do is innovation, and everyone is accountable to innovate, and that's really what the journey has been. And I feel that yes, it has been a journey, but at the same time, no one in our organization questions why those are the purpose, those are the goals and objectives. So everyone's aligned to achieving that, so we are all trying to innovate in order to deliver those core objectives of the business.
Fascinating. And I think for those of you who are watching this as an edit, when Helen's talking about that Mission Zero initiative on the ESG side, when she's talking about the sort of the being a problem first type company, thinking about the customers, we're going to come back to some of that in the future edits that you might see. So definitely have a look at other videos for me to sort of focus in on that in a little bit more detail. But I think what I'd like to do now is we've obviously just gone on and talked about this sort of Lendlease no longer having these sort of heads of innovation. And I've sort of deliberately, the question which is just below us, I've deliberately kept in that sort of, your job title of that head of innovation Asia as part of that role, which is obviously was what you were beforehand. So I've kept it in. But what I'd really like to now understand, just to help others, is what's that journey been like for you to arrive at Lendlease and go into that innovation role, and now sort of really come back out of that into that sort of head of that development practice that you've got around the world. Can you just help people understand your personal journey? Would be great.
I think my personal journey was, initially I've been a project-based person, delivering projects, mixed-use projects for the last 20 years. And through that, I've always tried to push our team to kind of streamline our processes, start from thinking about what systems make us more efficient, and how do we work better, faster and more efficiently. And then I think over the years, what I've realized that on projects, we seem to always just repeat mistakes on those projects. And through that, what I spoke to you about is a lot of the innovations that happens in businesses is also people are not really clear on what we've learned as well, and what we've already innovated on. So I've evolved my kind of purpose, rather than fixing silo projects, to going as a business, how do we set up, like what is the knowledge in our business? How do we share that knowledge? How do we adopt more of an enterprise mindset when it comes to collaboration and working across teams within ourselves and within the industry? And then how do we use that IP and that knowledge to build capability, and then through that capability to innovate? So over the years, when when I was asked to do the innovation role, I saw it was a great opportunity to enter a very, at the time, immature market, to push the conversations around solutions. How do we work with partners in the community and startups? How do we actually get to adopt some of those technologies that are in the market, because we don't have the ability to solve them all ourselves. And then, so that was a real core purpose for the region. As we launched Propel, we learned a lot about working with startups and how do we actually not just work with the startups, but also learn to create value within our work streams, whether we, design or build or deliver, and who's in what type of technologies are out there that we can work with. But at the same time, we also had an innate recognition that not everyone sees the value in adopting new technologies, or changing the way they work, or actually asking for help. And I think that that needed like a bigger purpose than just changing the way we work, or just using new technology, or just because there's this concept of prop tech and commercial real estate and transformation, that doesn't mean everyone is early adopters or will be on the same bandwagon. So it comes to organization, like when I talk about purpose, like I think to develop that larger purpose where everyone has the same mission, objectives, that was the journey. And so I was, asked to lead practices at Lendlease, which essentially is taking all the knowledge and the expertise locked away in individuals and projects in our businesses across the 4 regions, and making sure that people leverage it, and whether it's documentation, it's sharing innovations, it's sharing best practices, and it's collaborating, it's providing that culture that you're not alone, you're not trying to solve something on your own. But not only that, is if you are trying to solve it, someone else in the business or in the industry has solved it already. So
Yeah.
tap into that. And then it goes to this 80-20. So if you get that consistency and that 80% of what you know really well, then you can innovate. And then out of the 20%, how do we actually push the boundaries in our industry to change the way we work? How do we push the boundaries in terms of how we actually execute and deliver projects? Then, innately, everyone will innovate because there's that core objective, that we have, the mission zero objectives, the digital transformation, which the company is now going to have launched. Lendlease Digital have launched the Podium Insights recently, and it's all about data-driven, customer-focused decision making. So, as an organization, you had to start inside, and and that's what we realized, that these silo roles of innovation doesn't really work at all. So I took that as a evolution of my core purpose, is to drive innovation through driving IP, knowledge sharing, driving the enterprise mindset culture within the organization, and using all that great stuff that we have, all the special sources that we have in our organization, and building capability for our people, but also that enables our people to drive a lot of the other, core objectives that the business is trying to achieve.
Yeah, and what's an incredibly strong angle that I'm getting from you there, and I was just trying to remind myself, it's the you talk a lot about purpose, and I'm hearing a lot of, to use Simon, I can't remember his surname.
Simon Sinek.
Sorry again.
Simon Sinek.
Yeah, that's the one. I was desperately going, I'm listening to his audiobook, I must look at it. You're talking a lot about the why, which
Yes.
he would talk about a lot in his
It's one of my favorite books. I think I've read that book 3 or 4 times over the last few years. And
you have to keep revisiting it, because you do have to remind yourself all the time that it's the purpose and the mission that you're driving towards, not the what are you actually doing. So that was coming across very strong.
I feel like you need to read that book every time you start a new role, every time you have a new team, and almost every time you're trying to solve something big. So when we start with why, we go from the inside of the circle. Why is the reason to buy and do. What is really merely the purpose of the tangible products as a proof point of that belief, and the what's are the reason that we can point, rationalize why we so much like a company or a service or product over another. And it goes to, okay, so why is this your core purpose? How is your process to deliver that? And what is your process? Like, what do you need to do to get the results? And I think very few people and companies can articulate clearly why do they do that. And it's really not just about making money in the end of the day, because of course, we are accountable to our shareholders, and we need to be able to run a profitable company. But the why is about the core purpose, and why does our company or your product or services exist, and what really gets your people and your teams out of bed in the morning,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
why should anyone care about that? So
But that's exactly the point, right? Why should they care? And a big credit to you that just in a description of your journey, am I able to pick up that your favorite book is by Simon, and so it's a credit that you can obviously get it across without even saying it. So that's really cool. So let's move on into some sort of very short form areas here, just because I'm quite interested in terms of areas around culture. So I think culture seems very strong with you. So I'm quite interested in, what does it actually mean?
Hmm. Hmm. And I guess when it comes to culture, like, what do you feel that, are you talking about culture in terms of the way I work, or the company, the like,
In
or
this instance, really for me, it's about you. What does that
mm,
culture mean to you?
yeah. So I think, again, culture means how you operate, and the values and the purpose and the mission. As I sound a bit
Yeah,
repetitive, but it is, and it's that culture. So the values of how you work, the integrity, the respect, how you actually operate, not in silos. And then what's the purpose? What's the big picture? How do you actually inspire greatness? How do you align passion with purpose? Um, and how do we, as I think, contribute to the bigger sort of picture of the world right now that we're in, with all the challenges that we have around, affordability, concerns around inflation and economical and political costs. And, like, I think it's just about what role do you play in your job, in your team, in your organization, that contributes to that. And I feel that as part of the culture that we have, I can say that we have a strong purpose on that. And as a developer, we do have a accountability and responsibility to improve the world, because we fundamentally are responsible for a lot of the climate change issues that
yeah,
exist right now in the world. And a community can't thrive if we don't change the accountability of ourselves to the planet seriously. And that's why we embark on Mission Zero, and it's really our commitment to be absolute zero carbon by 2040, which is aggressive.
mm,
It's everyone says it's aggressive, but the reality is climate change is the biggest problem we're facing, and we are part of that problem. And we do also, as an organization, create, millions of places where people live, they work, they play. But the reality is also our industry, our real estate industry, release around 40% of carbon emissions that threatens that whole status. So what do we know? We need to be accountable. We need to act. What we've been doing is trying to be leaders of that space and taking responsibility, and make it our core purpose and mission to
yeah.
reach net zero carbon by 2025, and then absolutely zero by 2040. Now, our
And that's
industry,
and
that's the
let
most
me
aggressive targets in our industry by far.
Oh, there's no doubt, and I think for those of you who are watching this, we're going to focus very, very deliberately on an ESG question later on, which will be edited together.
Mm,
So do take a look on that one. But I think sort of taking that on further in terms of that sort of short form. Again, we've talked about digital transformation quite a bit. So how does, in your sense, and I know you've done a lot of sort of work in this area, what does digital transformation mean for you at the moment?
yeah, so I think when it comes to digital transformation, for me, it's about, like, working through how do we actually really, as an organization, and when I mean organization, it's not your job or your job, but as an organization, really focus on data and technology to optimize the delivery of better services and products for your customers. Now, what does that mean? It means, how do you better understand your customers? How do you understand every detail of their touch points, and then how do you actually drive top line growth by that to improve your services and products. And I think that is the core. Like, every organization cannot say that they are doing digital transformation if it's just spot solutions. I'm adding a system, or I'm, you know, buying a software, or I'm automating something. But it's really, how does an organization really raise a focus on using data and technology to improve their product and services that are customer focused? And that's what we are
Yeah.
doing. Where we are very excited to launch a couple of very great products that is really much focus on those insights. Yeah.
So, I mean, just to pick up on that, I mean, I think what's really important there is that mention of the word data. It's often lauded around the industry that, we're working with data, and I think there's actually a lot of misunderstanding about data in and of itself, which I think will continue for a long time. But, when you actually break down digital transformation, and we've done a lot of work in this area, and there's often 5 sort of core pillars of that. And you sort of look at customers, competitor, data, innovation, and values. Sort of the 5 core components of that structure. So I would entirely agree with your thesis that data, and then obviously technology stroke innovation is central to that. But and we'll come on to those sorts of initiatives a little bit later on when we discuss priorities of innovation. So we're going to tap on that. But I just want to sort of a couple of questions before we go into some quick wordplay about your leadership, really, Helen. So one of the things that I'm interested in is leadership as a phrase. What does it actually mean to you in your world?
Yeah. So for me, it's been really authentic. It's having passion and purpose, as I mentioned earlier. For me, it's also about pushing the status quo. And I think a lot of us, with our personal and our professional challenges, I'm definitely one to have many of them, as you know me personally as well, is, like, I like to try to disrupt myself by pushing and challenging the status quo, and pushing what I do, no matter what it is, to always question why we do it, and how can we do it better, and how do we change, the people around us to think differently. And I think that's what leadership is about. It's about, and not having all the answers, but it's inspiring greatness. And I think that's really key, to not just have all the answers, but give people purpose to drive change to find those answers.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I really like that phrase of "I like to disrupt myself." I think that's it's a really core decision. But I often see leadership and parenthood as almost sort of quite closely linked, and the thought of disrupting myself is very worrying when it comes to parenthood.
Well, I do that way too often. As you know, I embarked on a MBA, pregnant with my 3rd child, and disrupted myself about challenging. Everyone said I couldn't do it, and I really wanted to do it. And so, with my
Well,
newborn, and I went across the world to learn more and be better. And I think we both found that was quite an experience as well,
and
which
I
I do
remember you
question
doing
why I did that in the first place.
it. I remember when you did it, and I also remember, and for those of you who you should link up with Helen on LinkedIn and go back through the COVID times. And it was one of my great memories of COVID was watching Helen's sort of time-lapse videos of working and parenting in Singapore. And it always brought a smile to my face, because I just knew that was the experience that everyone was having. So, and actually, do you know what? That for me was a true display of leadership, because it was humanizing what everybody else was going through, but not willing to sort of share it. And you sort of overshared to the extent that it made people go, okay, wow, we're all there. So that's leadership. But let me ask you sort of like one last question around that leadership topic, which is, what's the biggest tip that you would give future leaders who are looking at that sort of innovation technology type area? You've been there and done that. So what would you recommend to them?
So again, I'll go back to clarity of purpose, having the discipline
Yeah.
and consistency. Even Simon talks about the 3 degrees of certainty, like what are the tangible, rational, sort of highest level of confidence we can give our people to make the right decisions. And when it comes to making gut decisions, what's that highest level of confidence we can offer and to make the decision feel right. Now, there's also the emergence of trust and discussion around trust. When we see people in organization that are driven by reasons that go a bit beyond self-serving, aligning the why and the how and the what in a way that builds that trust. We talk about a lot of, mental safety these days. And so it goes back to really, for me, asking what really as a company or as an organization or as a leader you are to differentiate from others, to challenge your environment, to differentiate you from the competition in terms of what you're trying to deliver, your services and your products. And then, like driving passion, I said driving passion and purpose, I think, because understanding our customers and actually communicating the why and having a real flexibility to the market to communicate that. Example, Apple and Dell Apple makes computers, but Apple also makes iPads and iPhones, and Dell on the other hand is defined by what they do. And Dell does computers. So consumers don't feel comfortable buying anything else from them other than a tablet or a smartphone, and they try to expand it and do some verticals and focus on their corporate business. But really, in the end of the day, when you're talking about first mover advantage of when why is in the picture, like you take the case of Apple. Apple was very creative in producing MP3 players, and then they marketed their offering to more like what instead of the why. They started doing iPods, and then I think giving us the why, and it would drive and attract talent as well and people, and you can't do anything well with a great team of people. And so when you have this core purpose, you can attract the right people that's aligned with the mission. And I think that's what great leadership is, to kind of have that and articulate that really clearly.
Yeah, and I think to round that off, when you said at the start, almost going right back today, and you said it's about having clarity and purpose, and I really like your the sentence that you use back. And if you're watching this as an edit, go back to the "What does culture mean to you?" section where Helen says, how do you align passion with purpose? I think is one of the most important lines I'm going to take from this interview, because it's absolutely bang on, and that is that big tip for that leadership side, is understand. Again, we're going to go back on Simon Sinek's book of you've got to practice the why. So that the book question, I think, is going to be quite interesting coming up, Helen. But that's a really good area. So why don't we? I'd like to now just go back a little step and just do some quick fire discussions, because I often use a little bit of a wordplay round in this, and just do sort of one-word answers to build effectively sort of a graphic in time of what everyone thinks of different phrases. So I'm going to ask you 10 quick phrases. What does strategy mean to you?
What does strategy means to you?
Yeah, in one word.
Having a plan.
Plan. Okay. What does a competitor mean?
Competitor.
Yeah.
Conflict of interest. No, competitor, I think would say.
But
yeah.
If that is what it is, I mean, you would be the second person who've actually said that. So.
Oh, really?
If you're, yeah. Because,
but what comes to mind immediately is, well, what's your value proposition?
Okay. What does it mean to you when we talk about culture?
Culture is about having purpose again.
Okay, so purpose.
Strong core
What
purpose.
about PropTech?
PropTech is, well, it's a part of a transformation journey.
It's been interesting to actually see how different people have sort of answered that, because I think there's definitely a narrative at the moment that, PropTech is, and I'm guilty of this as the next person, but when we started that narrative back in the early sort of 2010s, it sort of now got to the point where, as a marketing phrase, it still works, but actually as a common sense approach to transformation, it doesn't. It's almost alienating as much as anything else. So
Correct.
it is interesting to see what people are saying about that. One word to describe ESG in your mind.
One word.
Shall I tell you what? I thought Jordan's, well, it wasn't really one word. Jordan yesterday, Jordan Costalacusa, I think, just to put a bit of pressure on you, said mission critical, just as an example. No pressure, Helen.
It's so funny because we call out ESG purpose mission zero, which is our commitment to absolute zero carbon by 2040. So, which is
let's do that, because it's we're going to come on to that, because I think it's so important. Customer. Yeah.
Customer is really about empathy.
Yeah, good one. Really, really good answer to that. And I think customers are changing, right? And to talk earlier on when you talk about digital transformation, and really you paraphrase it as working through data and tech to develop better services for customers. You have to have that layer of empathy to actually be able to understand what it is that they're looking for and what it is that they're needing.
Understand that their individual needs, where they are, their experience are, their touch points, their needs, their future needs, their current needs, their independent needs, and their dependency needs, and their evolving needs. Yeah.
It's always changing. Right, a couple more. Data.
Decision making.
Innovation.
Culture.
And last one, leadership.
Back to purpose. Vision, purpose, and values.
Cool. Alrighty. So look, before I get into some other ones, I just want to ask a quick question, and we've touched on a single book about several thousand times already in this interview. That of Simon Sinek's Start With Why, as a huge reference point for you. Would that be the book that you would recommend others, or have you got something else that you would also?
I mean, people laugh at me because I do target a book a week to read, and yes, I do. I'm busy.
Book a week?
Yeah. It's my this is target, is 2022 target, and the book will be one hard copy, one audiobook. And so I use the audiobooks when I'm going around doing my errands, taking kids out for a walk, driving, picking them up from school. But then the hard copy is really important, and I find that I'm always marking up my hard book copies. So there's a lot of books I recommend, and you can follow me on Goodreads actually. But Simon Sinek, yes, 100%. Start with the why and know how. And what he also talks about is, and some would say I have too much energy, but he talks about energy, and energy motivates. When it comes to, you've raised James leadership so many times, and energy motivates charisma and it inspires. It's really easy to see. Leadership needs energy. It needs to, people, your team, your culture, the people you liaise with, they need to see it, and it's measurable. And all great leaders that I aspire, and we have great leaders like our CEO Tony. He's very charismatic, and they have a very clear clarity of the why, and undying belief on purpose, and the cause is bigger than themselves. And so when it comes to my favorite book, talking about why and how, like behind every why type of leader is the how type of leader who brings the why into life. And so I believe that you need both. So, the why type of leaders are visionary and overactive. They like, for me, I do have an overactive imagination, and I tend to be very optimistic. I believe in everything that can be accomplished through intent and focus and commitment and discipline. Um, and the how type is also more practical. It's a realistic, tends to be more focused on the things. And I find that you need to be a bit of both, having the why and the how type leadership qualities, which is invoked and provoked in the book, is really interesting.
And
And yeah, and that
sorry,
vision and mission is really key to
mm.
to leadership.
And I was just going to touch on the fact that having read it a couple of times myself and being able to pick up obviously your favorite book from just the things that you were saying, which I'm quite impressed by myself. I might toast myself later on for working that one out. But I'd never broken his suggestions down to, there are different sorts of leaders for different parts of his recommendations, and that, the characteristics of leadership around the why, and there are characteristics of leadership around the how, and arguably the what. So I really like that, and thank you for sharing that. And I'll share a little secret. I'm almost determined to start an innovation book club up again. I did it years ago, right? Because I love reading. But I mean, I was saying to people we should do a book a month, and I had feedback from people saying, "Are you kidding? I couldn't read a book a month, and you're reading a book a week, and then you've got the audiobooks." I don't know how you do it. So I don't know what.
It's a target. It's almost year end, and I've got a few more weeks and a good list to get through. So.
So let's just go back onto that sort of innovation and leadership stuff, and I want to investigate some of that now. So in the sense of innovation in itself, what's the biggest frustration you've had with that sort of innovation journey over the years? I'm really interested in that.
Yeah, look, I think the frustration is spot solutions. I think through innovations, what we realize is that if you think about the customer, and I talked about empathy earlier, and the customer journey, like not one solution solves your whole problem. And I think, and the expectation of, yes, one solution will solve your problem is not realistic. I agree with that. But I think how we integrate spot solutions with the whole entire experience and the journey is been a frustrating challenge. Integration is key. And when you have spot solutions, multiple platforms, multiple apps, multiple experiences, and not consistent experiences, then really you're not really customer focused. And then when it comes to a lot of the other frustrations is a lot of organization that, and this is speaking from my experience also, is that sometimes you're too inward focused, thinking that you have the best solution when you really need to be thinking from the outside inwards. Do you mean? So that's some of the key frustrations. Again, challenging to, I spoke about change, change transformation is challenging. The problem with innovation is you think about the solution, but you don't think about how you can get the adoption better, the integration, the business implementation. How do you actually get it done how do you scale a solution? How do you make it how do you train? How do you embed? I think that is always a light touch when it comes to transformations. And that's what we are really focused not to continue doing.
Completely agree. Okay. So I'm going to now just sort of go into a little bit more around that sort of innovation journey, really. One of the things I'd like to pick up on at the start is really an understanding of the sort of the priorities that you and or Lendlease have when it comes to innovation. How are you developing the sort of strategies that you have in place?
As I mentioned, these strategies around like our Mission Zero objectives, that's our priorities, roadmaps around that. And if you think about the relevant themes around workplace these days and the customer. And if you think about, like, let's just talk about workplace for a minute. The workplace paradigm has really been disrupted since COVID, right? So
Yeah.
you've got hybrid work. It's definitely here to stay. You and I are hybrid working. I'm either sitting in the office and you're sitting from home now. The inflexible cost of infrastructure in our real estate, it's still brick and mortar. People are still paying rent, still overheads, and there's commitments. And then there's the whole ESG ambitions. Like, everyone is now on the train when it comes to trying to achieve some goals when it comes to ESG. But then there's all these factors, right? So you've heard about the great resignation or the war for talent. You've heard about the challenges on getting people to return to work. You have the culture gap. You've got, like, buildings that are still, you can see, empty. And then you got unpredictable people turning up at work, and you turn up and there's no one here. You got fragmented data because you've got building systems that are not connected to customer interfaces. And then building systems, as we know, in the whole PropTech decade of transformation, is still not integrated.
Yeah.
And then they're not really focused on the customer. It's focused on the building targets. But what you don't realize is that it's one in the same when it comes to the approach. And then when it comes to the employee health and well-being and all the things that we've been talking about, like, how do we actually serve and make decisions better? So there's real tipping points now, as you know, that the data is there. 52 employees are considering to switch hybrid work, and more than 50% of employees are planning to incorporate some flexible work office space over the next few years. And then, people are starting to think about what type of organization do they want to work with, and
Yeah.
they're leaving companies left, right, and center. So what does it mean? It means we really need to be focused on making the right decisions, from CEO levels to how we leverage the real estate assets to better embed culture, and employee value proposition is changing across the world. CEOs and CFOs are going, how do I structure less flexible leases and employees perks and incentives to get people, and then how do we maximize our facilities in our buildings to be more cost efficient and improve customer and employees productivity. And then when it comes to workplaces and the leaders, how do I create a healthy and sustainable culture and office environment that improves the customer experience, improves the employee experience, to ensure that the environment is responding to their needs. Now, we have recently launched in Asia Podium Property Insights, which actually provides the data insights that you need, and all the things that you're asking, or we are all asking, and it gives tools to employees like Lendlease to kind of meet the needs of the new demand of hybrid work. So it's it's very exciting, and I see the live data from the dashboards that we've been implementing. It enables us to kind of like connect with all the information of how people use the spaces in our places, and then it gives you transparency of data around across the portfolio through your sustainability objectives. It enables us to explore insights through our customers and their journeys and how they use the spaces and how frequently and what type of spaces they're using. It enables us to measure some of our goals as well. So we've just really launched that recently, a few weeks ago actually, with Accenture, and it's a kind of the first to go market. So Podium Property Insights, and it's enabled by Google Cloud, which is a seamless integration with providing a digital platform that actually uses data to help real estate owners and tenants assess space. And it really unlocks meaningful decision-making driven insights into place experience and optimization and sustainability. So it's something that I've been waiting to hear for a long time, because like we don't make data-driven decisions as much as we need to, and that's the only
And this
way
will
you can do that
enable
is being
you
customer
to do that.
focused,
Yeah.
leveraging future insights, being customer focused, optimizing space. And that's what we've been talking about, James, for years, decades.
Absolutely. No, and it makes sense. I mean, finally you can walk the walk and on the data side as well. So it makes perfect sense. And I think there's an element there where there seems to be a natural move now to something that we've talked about a little bit already in this. And you've talked about Mission Zero a lot, and we've talked about the release of the Podium Property Insights, which is this new product by Lendlease to enable you to be much more data-driven around aspects of sustainability as well. So why don't we now make that a little bit more succinct and organized in terms of, how is Lendlease really approaching your ESG strategy in terms of, what's the mission, what are the pledges that you're making, and how are you dealing with it generally?
We're now a 1.5 degree aligned company. So what it means is we've really set ambitious targets, industry-wide targets, and we're aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement, which sets global benchmarks for the real estate industry, and the targets are very clear and very strong. So what we said is we will achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2025. So for scope 1 emissions producing directly from fuse we burn, and scope 2 as well, emissions from the power we consume, brick and mortar, right? So we're consuming a lot. I'm using power and data as we speak. Energy, and then achieving absolute zero carbon emissions by 2040. Now that means we want to eliminate all emissions, including scope 3 emissions generated indirectly from activities, which it means the materials that we procure, and without the use of offsets, which is a big deal. Without the use of offsets. And those ambitions are not just big targets. Yes, they are big targets, but we also have like roadmaps, commitments that we've translated into 5 steps that gives us long-term really targets. So for example, the first step is, so out of the 5 steps, the first one is we have now as an organization created a decarbonization investment strategy. The steps 2 is we phase out, the target is to phase out diesel and gas in all our operations. Step 3 is use 100% renewable electricity before 2030. Step 4 is collaborate with our supply chain, how we procure, who we work with, what partners we work with, to set out the pathways to achieve absolute zero by 2040. And step 5 is collaborate with our partners, our occupiers, our tenants, the people who live in our homes, our residents, to transition to completely renewable electricity and achieve absolute zero by 2040. So now
that's really a lot. But it is significant, and I do to pick up on I think one element there, which is often forgotten, and I'll tell you with a little story. I was in Hamburg, Germany, about 3 weeks ago, and I was moderating the conference, and we had a presentation by a very, very significant German, Austrian, and Swiss retail operator. I mean, really, probably the biggest out there. And they were doing a presentation on their ESG. And I was sitting there next to a gentleman who was about to chair an ESG panel. And I was sitting there going, this is a lot of rubbish, because all they're doing is they're pledging what their targets are. And it gets my goat a little bit at the moment, Helen, if I'm honest, that everyone's making these pledges and they're not really stacking up behind. They're just saying, well, this is what we're going to do. And I think it's a very easy thing to make a pledge. It's very difficult to do it in practice. And I was sort of going a bit, well, okay, this is a bit PRE. And this gentleman next to me, he said, James, he said, you're right. He said, but these guys are at least making a pledge. He said, but what they're getting wrong in the way that they're going to achieve that pledge is what you've outlined in step 4. He said, nowhere, and bearing in mind this was a massive retail operator, said nowhere have they mentioned their supply chain, which actually is probably going to be as harmful for them as actually their own buildings and operations that they've got. And so I thought that was a really interesting angle to actually focus purely on the actual supply chain itself. And so, kudos for you guys for focusing in on that area.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty exciting. And in my role, it's so good to see, all the projects across the 4 regions start to achieve that. All of our Australian commercial office funds under management have now been officially certified as carbon neutral, James. And this also means that they've also met their net zero target well ahead of our 2025 goal. And our Australian Industrial Fund will be fully powered by renewables and carbon neutral this year. In partnership with Aware Super, in America, our multi-family portfolio in Boston and Chicago has been verified as net zero carbon as well. And new projects in New York and Los Angeles are also on track as well, with the same goal in construction. So in our Australian building business, we are the first carbon neutral construction services provider in Australia, and all of our Australian construction sites have achieved carbon neutral. And then in Milan, our Milan Innovation District, which is our 100-hectare mixed-use redevelopment, in Italy, which is aimed at zero carbon precinct. It's targeting to be powered by only renewable energy sources. So very exciting. I can go on and on. Look, it's not. We're not there yet, obviously, but it's making the real change. And I think when it comes to public and private sectors, we have an opportunity to really transform this when it comes to leadership, it comes to transformation, it comes to innovation, and it's about really moving the needle in our the way we design, the way we procure, the supply chain, through to digitalization, through to being smarter when it comes to responding to our customer needs. And that's where you'll see more of the themes that we've been pushing and disrupting ourselves when it comes to autonomous buildings and sustainable buildings of the future. And what does it really represent when it comes to static physical spaces, to be really conscious and self-governing, accountable, anticipatory decision making to adapt to and respond to human needs. And that's what we're looking forward to, an autonomous city, leveraging data insights and needs of the urban population, which we're all accountable to ensuring that we are moving towards the future and not destroying the future.
And just to round that off, in terms of to finish this section on ESG, I think what I quite like about everything you said is it absolutely aligns back to the very purpose that you talked about in the very first edit that people will watch here about describing innovation at Lendlease, which is around the purpose, which is to create places that people thrive, because there is a very much a long-term vision and purpose there, which is, well, we have a duty of care to create places that are going to be around for a long time. And so it makes sense.
And when you talk about transformational innovation, we really need in real estate to move towards Industry 4.0. We've been trying to innovate and understand issues faced by our industry, and really, you need to really focus on delivering an enabled transformation through digitalization. Focus on those mission critical or mission zero sort of objectives, James. So going back to why and core purpose, that's it.
But it's I'm afraid there are not many people who see it that way. There are many people paying lip service to this whole thing. And, it needs a very, very strong stance from strong leadership positions in strong global companies that explain that this is what we are doing. The more we have of that, the more likely we are to actually achieve some of those Paris Agreement ambitions that we all have. So I'm just going to, I'm very, very conscious of time, and I don't want to take up too much. I've just got 2 more questions I'd like to bring in, if that's okay. One of them, for me, when we started this interview, we went and we talked about describing innovation at Lendlease. And one of the things that you mentioned was, you are genuinely a global business, and secondly, you've been around for 64 years. So I'm really interested in terms of, given your mindset shift of moving away from sort of innovation managers to being very much about the culture of everybody within the organization should be innovating. How do you create that innovative culture that keeps on innovating? How does that work within Lendlease? How do you make your staff believe you can keep on innovating time after time after time and not look at it as a, well, we've just got to do this ESG thing and then we've ticked that box. How do you do that with Lendlease?
I think there's two things. So, and I've spoken about it. It's about ensuring that we have room to innovate and we have a strong purpose. So I spoke about the strong purpose. I'm not going to talk about it again because it's really about, creating value, creating places where community thrives. It's about having that core purpose around our mission, zero targets, and having a strong purpose. And then when it comes to having the right culture to really work towards that same purpose, because innovation is not a side initiative or a side gig. And then also, when it comes to some of their core areas, besides that strong purpose, is the strong initiatives, that foundational, initiatives in our organization that kind of pushes what we stand for, but also what we invest on. And you've probably heard that Lendlease has now a digital arm that is launching Lendlease Podium, and essentially it's disrupting ourselves around how we think, on how we, think about the life cycle of a asset as a investor, as a developer, as a real estate manager, as an operator, as an asset manager. And so it's an end-to-end digital platform that transforms how we really design, how we build, and how we operate, and automating, and connecting the supply chain, which we spoke about earlier, and delivering those data-driven insights, which we spoke about earlier. And it's an enabler of how do we start to, generate a autonomous building by creating the foundation and the infrastructure foundation for partnerships, for decision making, for a end-to-end solution life cycle, not looking at it like spot solutions. Like, I'm not looking just construction, I'm not looking at just asset management, I'm not looking separately at design, but how that end-to-end can be streamlined and provide a productive future for the property industry. Now, that's how we're driving innovation, because we believe in it, we invest in it, and we also are creating products and resources to drive those outcomes to those core purposes that we spoke about earlier, when it comes to our core purpose as an organization, but also what it means when it comes to some of those mission zero targets as well. That helps us deliver our pipeline, our projects, and then it also enables us to start with, again, the why and the how.
Absolutely. And I think coming back to one key point on there, when you talk about creating a culture that everybody is sort of working towards, it's that term, and I keep coming back to it because I've never heard anybody talk about it from a real estate perspective before, which is that attitude of, we want to disrupt ourselves, because if we're disrupting ourselves, then we're progressing, we're moving forward. And I think that's a really important focal point on that side. So I think what I'm going to do is, we've just hit the hour mark, and I'm very conscious of your time. I'm going to leave it there because there's so many fantastic insights in all of that, Helen. And I'm just going to press the end stream button. But before I go, I just want to thank you for joining me publicly. It's been brilliantly insightful. And we managed to get through all of the technical challenges at the start to keep this going. And obviously, again, a big thanks to Equiem, Oxford University Said Business School, and Unissu for giving me the tools to enable me to keep the series going. Because if you want to know my why do I get up in the morning? It's because I have set my career on taking the industry from not being digitally transformed to one where, with interviews like this with Helen, we're getting to the position where we realize what other companies are doing, and we can put those lessons into place to help our transformation as an entire industry, and not just as little company silos. So thank you, Helen.